Hi, and welcome to Transit Unplugged, the world's #1 transit executive podcast. I'm your host this week, Tris Hussey, on a special tech-focused edition, where we're talking about transit technology and transit technology trends. My first guest is Daniel Saddy, Director of IT Architecture at Trapeze, and someone who knows a lot about computer and cybersecurity. Daniel, thank you for being a guest today on Transit Unplugged.
Thank you, Tris. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. This is a topic that I've dabbled in the last 20 some odd years of being in computers and stuff. But I had really three things I want to talk about is kind of like the scope and the scale of the problem and what's going on, and then what agencies can do about these. So let's hit the first thing. Is it just me, or does it seem like public transit agencies have become real targets of cyber attacks lately? I mean, Vancouver had one a couple of years ago, and it seems like every few weeks we see another agency the victim of one kind of attack or another.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Like they've always been valuable public resources, right? So the people who are after perpetuating these kind of attacks are really looking at anything they deem as high value targets, right? You look at what transit agency represents and what they deal with. They deal with primarily like people, right? And that information is incredibly valuable to people who want that information, right? It's often said the industry that customer information and personal information is like as valuable as oil or other commodities, right? So people are looking for that information, and they will, go after any resource that they think it may be available in, whether that be private industries, public sector, anything that they can think they can potentially attack and get at to get that data, they'll go after for a variety of reasons, right? So like the severity, I think the severity goes more so with how quickly information spreads these days, right? So these days, there's actual real legislative teeth in many areas of the world to say, if this occurs, you're legally obligated to disclose this. And as such, like back in the day, there may not have been that kind of onus to say, I need to own this problem legally, or I may be financially or otherwise liable, right? So like I think the attacks are probably have always been this persistent, but the visibility is primarily, there's a lot more, right? You think about like just in general violent crimes, right? Quote unquote, back in the day, they didn't happen as often, but statistically it's shown that they have. It's just how information travels today is much quicker. So you hear about the worse more than all the successes. And like there's been like significant strides in the industry of how to protect against this, because this is not specific to any kind of agency. Like every single company on earth, no matter who you are, faces this. We see big companies that are exposed to this on a regular routine basis, and they are still fighting against it every single day. And it's a concern, but it's also kind of exhilarating in the same way, because there's a challenge out there and we need to meet it no matter who you are.
I mean, there's a couple of things I want to delve on. I'm going to go start with your last point. I was listening to one of the tech podcasts that I would consume, and there was a ad for one of umpteen many cybersecurity things, and they were talking about, cyber criminals only have to get it right once. You, as the company, you got to protect against it all the time. I mean, different modes of attack and vectors. It's not just a simple thing anymore. It's really complex. It's a hard thing to protect against.
Yeah, the reality is there is no one single model that works for everyone, right? You think about the most effective physical security implementations, right? They're usually multi-layered. You have your perimeter and you have checkpoints along the way. Information security is the same way, right? So it goes down to a lot of it, the technology, yes, but also the people and the practices and the protocols, right? So like when something occurs, do your staff have the knowledge to say, I picked up this USB in the parking lot. Should I plug it into my desktop? Like, no. And that's something that, a totally person off the street may do, right?
Yeah. That's why it works.
That's why it works, right? They realize, like similar to breaking into cars, they realize that cars are hard to break into, but it's easier to break into a house and steal the keys, right? So they know that because people, but if they don't have necessarily the outlook, or at least the attitude to take that security first mindset, that it's easier to appeal to the person and then get access that way. So it's comprehensive. You can have the most secure lockdown system in the world. If you have someone in accounting or HR or sales that does this, they found a way in. You can put up all the walls you want, but unless those walls are layered, it becomes really hard to have be adequate protections. It's a game in many ways, but it's an important game to play.
You touched on earlier the human element of cybersecurity, in that sometimes people are the weakest links. So what can agencies do besides the multi-layer approach, the IT things? What are the things that agencies can do to help protect themselves?
I guess it's probably just like driving awareness, right? And you do so by taking a stance that, as an agency or an entity, we're going to take security seriously, right? You're going to say that, given all the demands we have, we're going to prioritize some of our time, some of our effort, some of our focus to just addressing issues, right? And just being honest with each other, it's not just comes down to one person. It's kind of a team effort, right? Because no matter, this year especially, you're showing us like, no matter how things are structured, there's going to be unknowns that you just need to address. So by having kind of everyone looking at it and collectively working together towards the same goal, it's much easier to kind of just do a comprehensive response to, threats that may not be realized or threats that are actualized, right? People can get distracted. People will make legitimate mistakes, right? They won't be thinking about something. They'll just do it reactionary without thinking about it. And that's as much as it takes sometimes. But it's giving them the space to kind of sit and breathe and say, you know what? I remember my training. Should I be doing this? If I get an email from supposedly it looks like my boss, right? Have I vetted it? Does this request seem real? Right? Should I action this? It's a lot of those what if things that people need to take time and really ask themselves.
As we've learned, you and I have both learned in our careers in IT, that it is that education. And one of the things when I joined Trapeze, I thought our IT training was really great in that respect. Here are the things you need to know. And do you think agencies are taking that approach, doing more IT security training broadly because of the problems?
There's probably people within your agency right now that want to do better, right? And they may not feel necessarily empowered to do better. That's why I say, if you involve everyone in that process with just improving security, they'll contribute towards, and then you'll have people that are just established champions. So in lieu of an official training process, there's probably people within your organization that could exist anywhere that care about this. Because at the end of the day, they care about the riders, they care about the mission statement, right? And they care about their work. There's a sense of professional pride that goes into it as well, right? If you have people that are willing to stand up, I care about this, they'll put in the effort, and then they will carry that effort forward, and then they'll inspire people to do the same, right? So it's a lot of that kind of building up that culture and supporting that culture, right? For an hour or two, to sit people down, it's like, hey, this is important, this is why it's important, and as an organization, this is something we believe in, so we want you to believe in it. And then honestly answer questions, because most of the time they'll have feedback to say, here's an instance where I encountered this personally, or here's something I think that we can improve. And then if you don't know where to start, ask the people doing the work, because they're usually the ones who know best.
Give you the final word, because this is going to be on a tech segment looking forward to 2022. What do you think is going to be the top, cyber, security, computer security thing next year and coming up in 2022? What do you think is going to be big for us to be paying attention to?
So I think ultimately, and this is probably a global change, right? Look at how work operates day to day. If you're in an operational mode where you kind of just expected everyone to be in the office every single day, the last year, or I'm going to say 2 years, has been a real wake up call, right? And I got to really give it to the people in operations that put in the effort to make all these capabilities available to us. That maybe you had these capabilities before, but maybe not. And at a drop of a hat, suddenly the majority of the global workforce can work at home if they're able to, if they happen to be an office worker, right? And that's really incredible. But I think in doing so, we probably made some exceptions and probably took on some additional risks, right? So in facilitating the needs of the business, we may have increased our exposure. I'm looking at next year. I think the biggest risk is really common patterns that we may have skipped over just business necessity, but I think it's worth a second look to say, yes, we've granted people all this access externally, but what can people now do with it?
I agree with you. I think next year is going to be kind of the awakening of like, okay, we got to tighten things up. We got to make things better, still smooth for work, but let's close a few of the loopholes we may have inadvertently opened just because. Yeah, fantastic. Daniel, this has been a great conversation. And I know that you and I could probably talk about this for a long time. So
I would agree.
I will make sure that we have another chance to talk in the future about tech and cybersecurity. Here, Daniel Saddy is the director of IT architecture. He doesn't build things in the real world; he builds virtual things. And we're talking about cybersecurity and just security in general in transit. And welcome back to the second half of the Transit Unplugged Techapalooza, a geek-tastic episode, as I like to say, of tech transit trends for 2022. On our panel, we have Sebastian Vaitus, who is the VP of Innovation at Vontas. We have Priyanka Palacholla, who is the Senior Director of New Product Initiatives at Vontas. We have Tyler Dvorak, who is the Product Director of Mobility Planning at Trapeze, and Sabrina Blais, who is the Product Manager for Safety at Trapeze. Thank you all for being on the show. Earlier in the show, you've listened to Daniel's talking about cybersecurity and cyber attacks and everything. Sebastian, why don't you kick us off? What's going to be hot in 2022?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I'm really happy to share some of my thoughts and learn a bit more from some of the other people on this panel as well. The one thing that I was going to chat about today is electric vehicles, and I would say that everyone would agree that there's been a sustained effort over the years to decarbonize transportation in general. There's some good success that has been made with reducing emissions so far, but it's not. It's really, it's really the introduction and the continued refinement, really, of electric vehicles that now has the potential to take that decarbonizing to the next level. Bus manufacturers are also able to leverage the latest advancements in EV technology to bring to the market an offer that really meets those high demands for transit. And we're also seeing that the price gap between the traditional diesel and internal combustion, that internal combustion option and now the electrical vehicle alternative is narrowing. I would say that we see more and more agencies that are growing their EV fleets with many big cities throughout North America announcing commitments for a complete conversion to EV within 20 years, and some even as soon as 10 years. I'll use an example that is close to home here with Toronto. For TTC has already been running 60 electric buses on their fleet, and I was just reading that the agency had actually placed another order for 300 more. So there's a lot more hitting the streets for sure.
Yeah. I'm hearing this all over as well. We've had, like London is committed to that shorter time frame. I think they're talking about 2030 to switch over.
Yes.
A recent guest, Mr. Li Ling Wei of Singapore, was talking about how big electric taxis and vehicles and buses are on. And then recently I was talking with Lauren Cochran-Scoville of Proterra about the things agencies need to do for preparing for EVs. I agree. But I think one of the things that about EVs is that technology to understand the EVs is really evolving, and how you integrate that into your agency to understand, oh, this is costing, how much less per mile or per kilometer to run.
Right.
How do I get the best rates from my utilities based on when I have vehicles charging, because they can do variable rate, like if you're charging in the middle of the night. So I think that is absolutely going to be key for the whole industry. We're going to hear this over and over again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. And then there's, the way that I like to look at it is, we had about 150 years or so to learn from combustion engines and learn all the quirks and features of what's really still the vast majority of vehicles are on the road today, right? And then when we hear about like transitioning an entire fleet of public service, transit here, within 10 years, that's a very aggressive timeline, right? That time is definitely going to fly by really quickly on those commitments. But I feel that what is different this time, where we've kind of learned about combustion engines for the last 150 years or so, now we really do have the technology that we can rely on to move us through that transition much quicker. So the future is bright.
Oh,
Put it that
absolutely.
way.
And this segues right into what, Priyanka, you told me you were going to talk about, which was like the telematics, the buses talking to things, and how those data move around. So what tell me about what your big pick for 2022 is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having us on this show. Absolutely enjoy the panel here, and obviously, Sebastian already led that EV discussion. So, talking about IoT and transit, yeah. So, if you go to see, there are our statistics show that there are 10 billion IoT devices in use today, and this number will climb up almost three times in 2030. And we may wonder, why is it so important, why is it so powerful? Looking at the sensors that go behind these devices, they collect a lot of performance information on the performance, their location, usage. And as we harness all of this data, it would increase, quality of service, improve productivity of workforce, increase reliability in operation, asset productivity, um, and all of this comes behind that maintenance element. Um, Ultimately, I think we will see improved benefits, both from consumer standpoint and revenue uptick. But talking about smart transit, I see these IoT devices being used from vehicle to vehicle communication, road safety, vehicle to infrastructure communication. And when we consume this data with all our big analytics and cloud compute, we can build smarter and better solutions now. And I just wonder how better they'll get in the future.
RTC in Vegas, they were talking about their smart that signal control system that
Mhm.
is not only prioritizing buses, and actually Nashville is doing the same thing, prioritizing buses, but helping traffic flow, just car traffic, and not looking at just one intersection, but look at a ton, a sort of a grid, the whole grid of intersections. And then I think this even relates to the IT for PT developments, to standardize more of these IoT devices within
Absolutely.
buses.
Yeah, absolutely. And just since you said about road safety, right? There are a number of different systems today that give us this information. Waze, for example, GIS, Amber Alerts. But then we have to build all this infrastructure behind to talk or get data from that system. That means a lot of data, right, on their usage, decisions that then they can make on almost in near real time scenarios. Our systems becomes much more smarter with having those devices. Coming to more of the maintenance side of things, yeah, we are doing a lot of cloud based predictive maintenance, which are targeted for each and individual build of vehicle. These systems are designed for our bus maintenance teams to provide the most accurate data about multiple systems on these buses. So, our hardware on these buses are continuously collecting data from the CAN systems. Again, integrated with IT for PT, we could wirelessly talk to these devices. Data sent back to the back office on real time basis based on severity, Systems can auto configure to the bus build make model, and can be set up to trigger alerts for maintenance staff, for early warnings. Trends that, when monitored, can definitely avoid failures, improve asset performance, predict overall health of the fleet. Right, so
Hmm.
a lot more power once these systems are smart and connected with all the different sensors they are today.
You guys have just lining these segues up because Priyanka, you're talking about this wealth of data that is going to be coming from systems, and Tyler, that's your jam. Data is like where you live, and the analyzing data to get better performing systems. This is where the niche where you live.
Data is my jam for sure. I think it's a lot of people's jam. It's not a new to 2022 theme. However, I think that there's a reason for that. That we're seeing a ton of change come to transit. Right? Sebastian mentioned EVs. This is a fundamental shift in how service is delivered to customers. Ideally, riders don't really notice, except for that the bus is quieter, greener, etc. But operationally, for agencies, it's a gigantic change, requiring a lot of forethought. And going back to Priyanka's term that she used that triggered this in my mind, predictability. With all this change, people are going to want to know what's going to happen if I make a gigantic change to my system, which sites are doing at a rate never before seen, right? Reevaluating their entire geometric network. Something that tends to happen very incrementally, if at all, are now being completely reevaluated and overhauled. And making big changes like that, let alone to how the service is delivered through EVs versus internal combustion engines, let alone using fixed route versus something like microtransit, a more demand-based service. A lot of exciting things. However, for any of them to happen and become real, we need to know if they're going to work and how they're going to work in terms of how much ridership do we expect to get? What kind of on-time performance can I expect out of these changes? What kind of access am I providing? What's changing? What can I expect to see happen out of these results? Because if we're going to fundamentally make a big change to how we're providing service, we need to make sure that we're still meeting our goals. And that's the whole point. Otherwise, what are we changing for? So it's super exciting that we can use data to answer a lot of these questions proactively. And then, of course, evaluate the results and see if we were far off, and then narrow in to make sure that we can make better future predictions. But ultimately, if we're talking about completely overhauling our fleet, we need to make sure that we can do it and on what time scale, and then be able to talk about what that means in terms of how much carbon are we reducing in terms of our emittance. Are we improving the quality of life in neighborhoods next to bus stops because the bus is no longer loud? It's huge. Like, there's all kinds of secondary effects and beyond that we can actually quantify and capture and report on. And traditionally, that's been an entire job into itself. Finding it, like predicting how much ridership am I going to get? I don't want to say it sounds easy, but it's a pretty straightforward question until you have to do it and do an analysis on it. Then it becomes a much bigger thing. However, we've got lots of data that can actually help us tell that story relatively quickly. And because there's some commonality around the types of problems transit agencies are trying to solve, we can definitely utilize not just the data, but also specific tools to answer those questions quickly and, most importantly, accurately.
And Tyler, you touched on something when you were talking about emissions that I think ties into some of the tangentially to what Sabrina, your space is safety. And when I think one of the places that safety is really key is in the yard. Sabrina, you've been seeing this change in how people are viewing safety at agencies. So tell us about that perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I see is that agencies are trying to be a lot more methodical about how they assess risk. Like in the past, maybe something like are the emissions from buses a risk to our employees' health? Like, is something that they might not have recognized or categorized. But now, with the push from the FTA in the United States for agencies to be gathering feedback from their employees, from riders, employees who are in the yard all day and who experience like crazy amounts of emissions of various sorts, they can actually flag that and bring it to the attention of someone who might be sitting in an office and not be exposed to it all day and not realize how big of a risk it is. What I'm seeing more than anything is agencies who are embracing technology as a way of helping to solve their big problems. Maybe in the past, there was a lot of spreadsheeting. There was a lot of doing things on paper forms and, filling it out, bringing it back to the office, handing it to someone, or maybe transcribing it somewhere. There's big gaps in time between when you identified something and when you were able to actually, work on it. With things on paper forms everywhere, it was super hard for agencies to actually have a handle on their data. I think so many agencies are recognizing the power that is in their own data. And they're looking to leverage that, in all the ways that everybody else has talked about. Data is a big theme, but also in terms of safety. Can I actually measure the things that make a risk risky? There's the standard risk matrix that most agencies use. There's a bunch of different methods out there, but there's a standard one that most use. But, at the end of the day, it calls for you to make sort of gut feel judgments about how risky a risk is. But, in the agencies I'm working with, I'm encouraging them, and I'm seeing many of them, come to the table with this plan already where, they want to say, here's how I plan to measure how risky this is. My gut feel is, it's red. The risk is high, and here's why I think that. And then figure out ways to actually measure it with the data that they can gather from their own agency. Either it's leading indicators, things like rule violations. Are we seeing people aren't wearing protective gear? Maybe we've identified emissions in the yard. Are people not wearing their masks? Or, do you work on a rail line? Are you not wearing your reflective vest? Are you, walking around with headphones in so you can't hear things coming at you? Rule violations are a big leading indicator that you might have a safety problem. And then be able to actually measure outcomes. How often is this risk materializing? Or if you don't think you can stop a risk from materializing, can you make it less impactful? Can you make it less likely to actually cause injury? Can you make it, cause less damage? So I'm seeing just a lot of agencies who are, coming to the table ready to just embrace tech in a way that they haven't in a long time.
This, and something that I think all four of you have touched on, and this is the trend that I've been watching and seeing, both from the consumer side of technology, but really also on the agency professional side, is technology has become more accessible. Tyler, you and I talked about this in terms of GIS, and Sabrina, I know that this is top of mind for you, and Priyanka and Sebastian, top of mind for you both as well, is that we're making technology and the use of these data that are so critical for making decisions easier. Because it's one thing to say we're going to move from paper or from spreadsheets to a cloud-based app, but it's a whole other thing to make that accessible and approachable to people so they are not afraid of doing a what-if analysis. They're not afraid of looking at, okay, well, we're going to try to measure these potentially risky activities, these rule violations that Sabrina, you mentioned. But now, it's not so hard for me to go like, wow, okay, we really have to get people to wear their PPE because they're not. That's a big deal. I think this, for me, this is, again, data is a huge trend. It's the accessibility of the tools. To me, is something that I think is going to power all these changes we want to see agencies make in the next, year plus.
From an accessibility standpoint, like, I'm very focused because, that's a thing that I've had a lot of conversations with agencies around the country about mobile access and mobile devices. They don't, they want a person working in the yard to be able to pull out their phone and report something they saw that was unsafe. They want riders to be able to report something, anything that they saw that was unsafe and communicate with them. We see the same sort of trend in the relationship space for transit, where a lot of agencies are looking to connect with their riders and connect with them where they are. And, that really means in today's world, moving into the mobile space, which is where a lot of their consumers are, and being accessible to them on their phones, making it so they can talk to you on their phones, so they can, book transit tickets on their phone, like just make everything so much more accessible than it has been before. And that applies to back office at agencies, and that applies to how they want to communicate with, everyone, all their customers, all the riders.
Well, I think that's a great last word. Is really what we're all talking about is connecting with our communities. We're connecting with within an agency who we're working with, and the people we serve. This is what it's about. It's connecting, it's communicating, and doing it accessibly and equitably, so that everyone can use transit most effectively. Well, this has been fantastic. And I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your extremely busy schedules to sit and talk about my favorite thing, which is transit technology and all things geeky. And I hope all of you have a very happy holidays.
Likewise, same to
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this week's special tech edition of Transit Unplugged. We covered everything technology related to transit. And thanks to my guests, Daniel, Sebastian, Priyanka, Tyler, and Sabrina, for making this a fantastic look forward to transit tech in 2022. Now, as always, if you have questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to email us anytime at info@transitunplugged.com. So until next week, ride safe and ride happy.